What's going on, New York Football Giants fan? This is NYG Jeffy T 3285, and today it's part 3 of the New York Giants Roundabout, where we're going to be going around and talking about those wide receivers for the New York Football Giants. There's a lot of them on this roster right now that are going to be battling it out, especially the back end of that roster for the fifth and sixth spots, unless they carry five, for the fifth and sixth spots for the New York Giants wide receiver group. And there's 14 competitors you got in there right now. They're going to be battling it out to make the New York Giants roster going into the 2022 season. And that's guys like Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Sterling Shepard, Wandel Robinson, Darius Slayton, Richie James, Travis Toivonen, David Sills, Alex Botman, Keelan Doss, Colin Johnson, Richie James, Austin Prohl, Robert Foster. All these guys are going to be competing for a chance to make the New York Giants roster this year in terms of the wide receiver position. And we're going to start right at the top. Good old number 19, Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay had himself a very, very rough 2021 season, marred with injuries, some drop passes. He just couldn't find a connection with Daniel Jones at all. Even sometimes it looked like wasn't even trying on the field. But Kenny Golladay is still your number one receiver that you signed to a 4-year, $72 million deal in 2021. And he's coming into this season with a lot to prove right now, as the New York Giants could easily get out of his contract at the end of the 2022 NFL season, and they wouldn't be taking too much of a cap hit. So Kenny Golladay is coming into here with a lot to prove, and he's going to show to the New York Giants brass that he's not just a guy that is going into soon his age 30 season, a guy that's not what he was since his days in Detroit in 2018, 2019, but he's a guy that can go out there and provide those tough contested catches when you need him to be. He's a guy that will be able to play 15, 16, maybe all 17 games, provide what you're expecting from a number one wide receiver. Not going to create a lot of separation, but he's going to win those 50-50 balls. Going to be that deep threat over down the field if you need to throw the ball up to him and let him pluck it out of the air. Maybe even use him for the back shoulder throws and let him use that 6'4", 210, 250-pound frame to go up there and be Daniel Jones' big security blanket and pretty much be that possession receiver, which you're expecting him to be in this New York Giants offense. So Kenny Golladay, you're expecting him to come out there and be that number one wide receiver. But if it's not him being the number one wide receiver, then it's going to be good old number 89 that you're also expecting a lot from and going to his second season as Kadarius Toney. Guy's loaded with talent, great at separation, can break in and out of his routes very well. He's also a guy that can take it deep when he needs to, but he's also struggled with some very minor off-the-field issues. Maybe not, you don't wonder if, what's his dedication to the game. He's also struggled big time with injuries. He did not play a lot of games last year, but when this guy was on the field, he was a game breaker for the New York Football Giants. And he's a guy, when you get the ball in his hands, similar to Saquon Barkley, like I made in the previous video in part 2. Kadarius Toney is a guy that you could center your offense around, and he will break a game open with his ability to get cut inside and out in his routes, be able to cut back when he gets the ball in his hands, and he can do something. He can do a lot out of nothing. Even when players are right by him, defenders are near him, he can make the plays necessary to get you those first downs and even more. So you're expecting Kadarius Toney is his biggest issue. If he could just stay healthy, you're expecting Kadarius Toney to have a big-time second year jump for the New York Football Giants under this Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka offense. So Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney, you're expecting to be guys to be able to lead this New York Giants offense in terms of the wide receiver position. But there's also another guy in this offense that some fans may be forgetting about, and he's the longest tenured New York Giant right now on the team because he's had injury issues himself for the past few years. But when he's on the field, he's very reliable, and that's number 3, Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard is the longest tenured New York Giant. He's going to his 7th season. Unfortunately, he's coming off an Achilles tear, which might have played a part on why he's back right now with the New York Giants. But when Sterling Shepard is on the field, what you're going to get from this guy is toughness. He's going to block well, probably the best blocking receiver on the team. He's that reliable guy over the middle. In the past, he's been able to take it deep, but he's basically pretty much your possession receiver over the middle, sort of like what Cole Beasley was in Buffalo. So what Sterling Shepard is going to be is what Brian Daboll had in Buffalo, is that's a reliable possession receiver. He's going to be that guy that's going to be the chain mover. He's going to get you your first downs, and he's going to be one of Daniel Jones' favorite targets over the middle. If Sterling Shepard can't stay healthy, you're just going to get toughness, you're going to get leadership, you're going to get a guy that's going to be able to make the catches over the middle, and you're going to get great blocking at that position. So Sterling Shepard, if he can stay healthy, you're expecting another guy that's going to be able to help out Daniel Jones a lot, and he's going to be a guy that you could say could maybe lead the team in catches. That's if he could last, like previously with Kadarius Toney and Kenny Golladay, if he can last 15, 16, 17 games in the season, but it's going to be a tall order. And then you get to the second round pick this past NFL draft, and that's Wandel Robinson, where this guy is going to be maybe going into this season. You think he's going to maybe be a gadget player, but I expect a guy like Wandel Robinson to come into the 2022 season and be more than just a gadget player. He, like Kadarius Toney and Sterling Shepard, is a guy you can move around all over the field. He's a very solid route runner. You could put him in the slot. Could put him in the backfield to run it. Could split him on the outside. I think Wandel Robinson is going to be moved all around this offense. And when you're expecting a play, when you need a play, I think Wandel Robinson is going to be the guy that you're going to be looking for in that offense. Shout out to Big Pat, because he made that, Big Pat Sports Talk, he made that point before about what he expects from Wandel Robinson. I agree with him. I think Wandel Robinson is going to be that guy when you expect him to make that play. He's going to be there to make that play. So I just want to give a quick shout out to my buddy Big Pat over there making that point, because I agree with him. I think Wandel Robinson is going to be a surprisingly big-time playmaker for this New York Giants offense, and I wouldn't even be surprised if he's one of the best rookies going into this 2022 season in terms of what you expect from him. Now, rounding out the rest of this wide receiver group, I think that the chances of the previous four guys I made about making the roster, Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Sterling Shepard, and Wandel Robinson, I expect 100% lock. I think those are your top four receivers going into the season for the New York Football Giants. You could list them any way you want, but I expect those four guys to be playing the majority of the snaps. I think those four guys are going to be rotated in and out, but I expect all four of them to be big-time contributors for the New York Giants going into this season. Now, rounding out the rest of the wide receiver core, you got Darius Slayton, the fourth-year wide receiver going into his contract year right now with the New York Football Giants. Mainly been plagued with drops, but this guy has had some success in the past, has a good rapport with Daniel Jones, mainly known as a deep threat, but when he can find a way to get open. When Darius Slayton is not dropping the ball, he can find ways to get open and make big plays for the New York Football Giants, as he showed in 2019. His rapport with Daniel Jones was something special. And if he could just be that situational deep threat for the Giants, that's all you can ask from him, and that's the best you can get from Darius Slayton. I'm perfectly fine for that. If he can be a guy that you can throw the ball to a few times, he can be a guy that can stretch the field, make you those 30, 40, maybe even 50-yard big plays. That's all you need from Darius Slayton. That's perfectly fine, because Darius Slayton has shown the ability to make those big plays when there. Had a couple of injury issues, but he's also a guy that will mainly be on the field when you need him to. He's not really been a true injury-prone player. Do I think my percentage chances of Darius Slayton making the roster? I'd probably say about 55 to 60% chance. I think out of the rest of the wide receiver core, I think he's the best option to be your wide receiver 5 or situational deep threat. But will the New York Giants want to carry a guy with a $2.5 million cap hit as your 5th receiver going into this season? I don't know. So I could see him being bounced in the end of training camp, since he's not one of Brian Daboll and Joe Shane's guys. But maybe if he has a good training camp and preseason, he can maybe prove them otherwise, that this guy can make the roster. Now, talking about the rest of the guys on this roster, I'm going to start with Richie James. Richie James has been a guy that's bounced around a little bit. He was with San Francisco, 6th-round pick over there. He has had the propensity to make big-time plays in the passing game. Even had a couple of games where he went over 100 yards, mainly known as a return guy. I think Richie James is mainly brought onto this roster. He can be a guy that can be your 5th, 6th receiver going into this season, but I think he's mainly going to be there because I think he's going to be used as your punt returner slash kick returner. I think that's what Richie James's role is. I think he's going to be the replacement for what John Ross's ability was last year, but I think he's mainly just going to be a guy that you're going to be using as your punt returner slash kick returner. His chances of making the roster, I'd say I think for him it's strictly 55, 50, maybe even 50% chance, as I could see him maybe being that sixth receiver, but mainly as your special teams guy slash punt returner, kick returner. Now, rounding out the rest of the roster, I know I've heard about this guy, Travis Toivonen. He's been making some noise in camp. He's even gotten some first-team snaps. I think this guy could have a chance with a good preseason and training camp to maybe sneak on the roster as your sixth wide receiver, but I really see Travis Toivonen as your guy that you're going to pretty much stash on the practice squad, since you have a lot more. You have 16 spots open compared to the previous 10 to 12 you had in previous years. So I think you're going to just stash this guy on the roster. I think his chances of making the roster is like 25-30% chance at best. I know he might be the darling going into this preseason, where we always have those darling players that we want to see make the roster, but we're expecting too much from him. I think he's just going to be a practice squad guy. Same for a guy like Austin Proehl and even a guy like Robert Foster. I think both these guys could be potential guys that are going to battle it out for that sixth roster spot, but I think they could be either practice squad stash guys or just outright cut guys in general. Robert Foster has shown some ability to take the ball deep in Buffalo. He can be a situational deep threat, a la what Darius Slayton is, but I just think that Darius Slayton's got a higher potential than Robert Foster. So I think Foster could be a guy that could either just be cut outright or could be stashed on the practice squad. And Austin Proehl, I expect the same thing. I think Austin Proehl might just be a camp body. Colin Johnson, another big body wide receiver, similar to what Kenny Golladay is, but this guy is just mainly going to be thrown out there as a blocking receiver. I think he's another camp body, not one of Jones Shane's guys. He might be able to be stashed on the practice squad, but I think this guy is just pretty much a camp body, if anything. I think his chances of making the roster are like 15%. I don't expect him to be here. It's going to be very, very difficult to see Colin Johnson making this roster. I'd say the same thing for Alex Bachman. He's pretty much like your fourth slot receiver, maybe even fifth, behind Sterling Shepard, behind Kadarius Toney, behind Wandel Robinson, even behind Richie James. I think he's going to be the fifth guy in terms of your slot receiver, and that's pretty much it. You might stash him on the practice squad, but you're not expecting Alex Bachman on this roster, so I give his chance about 0. David Sills, the Sills Army, it's all there. He's played with the Buffalo system before. He's been under Brian Daboll. Maybe David Sills can be a guy, if he shows it again in preseason like he did last year, could sneak onto that roster as a sixth wide receiver. The David Sills Army has been rooting for this guy to make the roster. Maybe he could show something. I think his chances of making the roster are about 35% chance. I just don't think he's going to be able to sneak on there. I don't see it with David Sills. I'm sorry to the Sills Army. I don't see him getting on this roster. I think he's pretty much a practice squad stash guy. Maybe you see him if the New York Giants have a ton of injuries at wide receiver again. Maybe you could see him sneak onto the roster at some point in the season. But I'm not expecting this guy to make the roster at all. I think he's just pretty much a stash guy, if anything. The rest of the wide receiver position, I don't know what you're expecting from them. I just pretty much the rest of the guys on the roster, you're just pretty much camp bodies like Keelan Doss. I think he's going to be a camp body, if anything. I'm not expecting him to be on the roster, even though the New York Giants signed him to a deal a couple of weeks ago when he had a camp invite. I'm not expecting Keelan Doss to be on this roster. I think he's got a 0% chance. I think he's just mainly a camp body. So that's just my round out of the New York Giants wide receiver position. Going into the 2022 season, if you like the video, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already to NYG Jeffy T 3285 for more breaking news, videos, and chatter surrounding the New York Football Giants. Turn on the bell for notifications on the next short or video that drops surrounding the New York Football Giants or the rest of the content that I serve with the Brooklyn Nets, New York Mets, and WWE Wrestling. And leave a comment below on what your expectations are for the wide receiver group, which guys you think are going to make the roster, who you're hoping will be surprised going into training camp and preseason. And what your expectations are for this team, for the wide receiver position as a whole going forward. If you think they're going to be able to make some noise in this new Brian Kafka and Brian Dable and Mike Kafka system. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your Friday. TGIF Friday, let's go. And stay tuned for part 4 coming on Monday next week, where I'm going to be going over the New York Giants tight end position, which this might be the biggest battle out of every position going into the 2022 season, as there's really no clear-cut number one guy right now in that position. But there's some pretty good competition going into training camp and preseason. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your Friday. Take it easy, and remember, let's go New York Football Giants.